Alrighty, and we're on. Martin Stark, how are you?
I'm good, yourself?
I'm good. So thanks for coming on the show. And I guess to give people a bit of an idea in terms of the things that you're currently doing. So you're a bit of a keynote speaker.
Yeah, I'm a keynote speaker, so I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Martin Stark, pronouns are he, him. As always, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land where we currently are, which is the Gadigal and the Bidjigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging.
Yep. And so I guess before we get into the things that you're currently doing, I always like to wind it back and talk about, how did we get there? So
this journey for me started in 2006.
Yep.
I just became an Australian permanent resident. Husband and I went to the UK so he could come and visit members of my family. And I had gallstones blocking my liver.
Gallstones?
Gallstones.
Yep.
And what happened, I was admitted to hospital. I had a procedure called an ERCP, which involved putting a camera through my throat so the doctor could look into my bile duct, into my liver and pancreas. Inserted a stent, but some dye seeped into my pancreas. And what happened, I went into intensive care. I had severe acute pancreatitis and my lungs had collapsed. And then I was placed in an induced coma for a week. Woke up. Then they thought I was recovering, but then I went into sepsis or septic shock, which is the severe form of blood poisoning.
Yep.
I was undiagnosed with a rare autoimmune disease. And what happened next was a tracheotomy was performed, which was always my worst fear.
So that's where they take out your vocal cords?
It's where they actually put a knife into your trachea and put a tube there so you can breathe.
Wow.
And then I was placed on a ventilator again. I could only describe the tracheotomy feeling as, imagine you're being constricted by a python, you can't move, but the python is trying to save your life. So I was in a coma again for about another week, had very severe trauma from the dreams I had. Then I've had 4 major surgeries. I've been hospital about 70 plus times. So that's kind of the short backdrop.
Yep.
But what happened is at the end of 2017, I almost died from the rare autoimmune condition, Addison's disease.
Okay.
So Addison's disease is my body doesn't produce cortisol.
Doesn't produce cortisol. Yeah, so that's a stress hormone, right?
That's a stress hormone. So imagine the event you having the flu and you might need to go to the chemist to get some medication.
Yep.
Imagine if that medication wasn't available to you, which is me, my cortisol levels. And when I get sick, I get very sick. So I almost died at the end of 2017.
Wow.
And the experiences of that brought back the memories of being in comas.
Yep.
And from that, I started into self-defense training and boxing to help overcome PTSD. So that's a very short summary.
We're going to unpack this completely, right? Yeah. So let's go back even further than that. So you obviously mentioned that you were overseas before. So you only moved to Australia in 2006, did you say?
2000.
2000, okay. So where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Lincolnshire in the UK, which is a county in the northeast of England. It's about halfway up between, I suppose, London and Edinburgh.
Okay, and then I guess for you, when you reflect back on childhood and what it was like growing up in Lincolnshire, can you sort of describe what that was like?
I can only really describe it if you can imagine a coastal country town in Australia in the 1980s, Margaret Thatcher years, where some communities were totally devastated through economic recession, declining of industries. But if you can also imagine close-knit communities. Swimming was my sport. I had 2 older brothers, so whenever there was a swimming carnival, we'd all be on the bus, going there, picked up 4 o'clock, home at 11 o'clock, but there was that real close-knit community feel.
Is Lincolnshire a big town, I guess?
So Lincolnshire is a second largest county in the UK.
Okay.
It's very flat, it's got some wild areas, but it's very rural, very boring. a big city, but... it's a beautiful place to visit, but not a great place to live if you compare it to Sydney.
Yeah, fair enough. And so you had a couple of brothers. Are they older or younger?
Yeah, both older than me.
Both older than you. So I guess, in terms of the household, what was that dynamic like for you at home as the youngest?
So I was always dragged along to things, but, I had 2 older brothers to look up to, and I was the first one in our family to ever go to university. Yeah. So if you think opportunity is not being available to you, but then creating your own opportunity. So what I really got from my brothers and my parents, and went to university, studied French and German, which are very rarely used these days, but really just being having access to an opportunity which really wasn't there for previous generations. I think that would describe my childhood.
Okay, interesting. So then, when it comes to schooling and things like that, like what kind of a kid were you? Like, how would you describe yourself?
So I was actually quite serious. I realised I was gay at about the age of 11.
Wow, okay.
So I was always the last one to be picked at school sports when it came to soccer or anything like that, but I was the county champion at swimming, so I was always popular when it came to swimming. I worked hard and everything else, but it was a good time.
Yeah. And then were you academic at all, or?
Yeah, I was quite academic. I was able to go to university, pass my A-levels, very academic.
Yep.
I mean, it was a very difficult time in the 1980s when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister. There was a lot of homophobia. There was a lot of feelings of rejection, scared of coming out. When I was 13, a law called Section 28 was enacted, and that prevented any discussion of being gay banned in schools.
Wow.
In the 1980s, there was a soap opera started called EastEnders. There were two gay characters, Colin and Barry. There was a peck on the cheek, and it was national outrage. The front headlines of the Sun newspaper. So you can imagine how endemic homophobia was in the 1980s, and being a scared gay teenager where there was no support. It was so much negative press against gay men at the time because obviously it was the 1980s and there was the awareness of HIV/AIDS. So very much a fearful time of being the only safe place was the closet.
Yeah. So then, okay, can we talk a little bit about that? You mentioned at the age of 11 you sort of realised that you were gay. I guess, how do you work that out?
The only way is you keep it to yourself, but also whenever there'll be a news report or a news article or anything, I would just try and find it or listen to it. There was a program on Channel 4 called Out. Channel 4 is supposed to be the equivalent of SBS here.
Okay.
And it was for half an hour or an hour on a Wednesday for 12 weeks of the year. I would try and watch that. I would secretly record it on a VCR so I could watch it later.
Yep.
But it was gradually just trying to at least find a way of seeing visual representation. George Michael, Boy George, George Michael didn't come out till the 1990s, even though we all knew he was gay.
Yeah.
But it was just trying to find who were the role models there, because there were none.
Yeah, okay. And so then for you, obviously that would, excuse me, that would feel quite isolating, right? You feel like you're fairly alone in this journey, or I guess, did you have any conversations with your brothers? Or
Never.
parents?
It was pure, just keeping it to yourself.
And did they ever, ask you about it?
No.
Yeah, okay, interesting. So then, I guess what I'm trying to understand is you're keeping this secret to yourself from the age of 11. At what stage did you feel like, okay, now I'm comfortable to sort of talk about it?
For me, I came out at the age of 27.
27.
So
that's 16 years.
16 years. I think for me, it was just exploring my sexuality, which I probably did in the late 90s.
Yeah.
Went to university, and it was still very much, there was the fear of rejection, not from my family, but that hard life. It was incredibly hard for people, even in the 1990s. And we started seeing a bit more social acceptance in the 1990s. I think the first part of this decade was very much more around acceptance, and you see more representation of people in the media.
Yeah.
But we all go through our own journey.
Yep.
I wish it'd come out earlier, but that's what it is. But you have to feel comfortable within yourself. You need to have a network. You need to have support. And in the 1980s, there was zero. It was very much a hateful environment in the media, wider society. When we think about marriage equality, was 2017 in Australia. The Netherlands, it was 2001. Now the UK was 2013. So when you compare Australia and the UK, they're very much behind when it comes to acceptance compared to the Netherlands and other countries like that. So
yeah. So then, I guess for you, in terms of your own personal journey, was this something that you felt like you were born this way, or was this something that you feel like as you're exploring your sexuality, exploring who you are as a person, that's okay, no, this resonates more for me in terms of the direction, of the kind of person that I am? Or
so I became aware, I suppose, around the age of 11, and that's where you're going through puberty and you're more aware of things that's happening in the media. So that's who I knew who I was. I denied it in my brain for many, many years. But I think we're born this way. This is who I am. I can't imagine not being gay. That's how it is. Anybody says it's a choice. Well, do people choose to be straight, or are you straight?
Yeah. See, I've sort of always, I've tried to work through this in my mind, right? Because I don't really know exactly where I sit with it, because it's like, and I don't mean that in any negative or positive way. It's just one of those things where it's like, okay, if people are born that way, then of course, absolutely, we should be accepting of who they are and what they stand for, and I guess what they believe and what their preferences are, right? Like, that's just, at the end of the day, if people you're not impacting another person's way of life, kind of a thing, like, it's like, whatever you choose, that's your choice.
Right? I'm going to challenge you a bit on that as well, because it's not a preference. This is who we are.
Yep.
And it's not about hurting anybody else. That's the same thing for anything in life. But this is who we are.
Yeah. Because I guess where I sort of, where I sort of struggle with that a little bit is when people, like, so, and I don't know if you want to talk about this, but there's, talk about, like, people who are attracted to minors, right?
So let's make things very clear.
Yeah.
Being gay is not being a
No,
paedophile.
yeah.
Paedophile.
So,
we just need to make that
100%.
abundantly clear.
Yeah, abundantly clear, right? But I just, because I just don't like when people that are pedophiles use that line of reasoning. They try and, like, sort of usurp what you guys are
so
talking
we
about.
just need to be very, very careful with language here.
Of course.
Right now,
Yep.
the world is lots of rhetoric against the LGBTQ plus community.
Yep.
When I was 11 years old, I was in a church with a paedophile. Didn't know.
Wow.
Just me and him in the church, and he kept giving me things to drink.
Wow.
Until it came to I needed to go for a wee,
Yep.
and it was, we can't have the lights on. So I had to take a wee with the guy holding a torch as I'm taking the piss, and he's looking at me. I don't think he touched me, but he was a paedophile who always wanted to spend time with me.
Wow.
I didn't realise that till a few years later.
Yeah.
And then
that was wrong. Yeah.
That was wrong, and then we found out actually the vicar knew about him.
Wow.
And covered it up. So please, we just need to be very, very careful that LGBTQ plus people, we are who we are.
Yep.
And there's no connection, there's no correlation with people who hurt children or grooming children.
Yep.
We need to make that abundantly clear.
Yeah. Well, see,
it's
that's
very offensive.
No, yeah, like, I mean, that's why I'm trying to. I want to make that delineation, right? Because, the people that hurt children, they're trying to use that same line of thinking. Right?
So I really just don't think this is a good connection to make, or even trying, because I'm attracted to other men.
Yeah, of course.
So that's the situation.
Yep.
What people who do that, disgusting crime.
Yep.
I don't know what goes through their mind, but it's nothing to do with, and if they're trying to justify this because of the LGBTQ plus community, that is fundamentally wrong. As I say, 11 years old, somebody tried to abuse me.
Yeah.
Fortunately, didn't get to me. He kept wanting me to go to his house and different things. Nothing stopped him apart from me, my parents looking out for me, saying this doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
So we just need to be, again, final point, we just need to be very, very clear that LGBTQ plus people, we are not this, we're not that, and it's fundamentally wrong to make any kind of connection with paedophilia and gay people, bi people, etc.
Yeah. Well, to be clear, right, like, I'm not trying to establish a connection between the two. What I'm saying is that I'm just talking about the line of reasoning that they're trying to usurp from, they're trying to take that line of reasoning away from the LGBTQ plus people and sort of, use it to try and justify what they're doing. And there's no justification for it, right? I think you and I both agree with that.
I just don't think this is a very useful line of questioning. And it's fundamentally wrong that people are trying to stigmatise and marginalise a minoritized community with something which is fundamentally wrong and harmful to people.
Okay, so let's move on. So when it came to high school, like, what was your experience like in high school? So
when I was about 14, I was diagnosed with asthma. So for me, high school was I stopped
swimming with asthma.
Started swimming with asthma, and I was in hospital quite a bit, and I put on quite a bit of weight because I had to take steroids. So childhood years in high school were I had support from fellow schoolmates, and then in the UK,
Yeah.
I say in England and Wales, at the age of 16, you go to sixth form college, so you can kind of leave school and do your A levels. So it was a bit cool because you could go to college just for the tutorials and lectures and not be there all the time. So having lots of free time and just hanging out with mates. So yeah, so I think
a good experience, right?
Really good experience because it really set you up for university as well, where you kind of like, oh, this is what it's going to be like, and I'm going to enjoy this for the next 3 to 4 years.
Yep. And so then, what was the drive for you? Like, obviously, your brothers. You mentioned you were the first one in your family to go to university, right? So that's obviously a bit of a tick in the box for you, right? And tick in the box for the family. But I guess what was the drive for you to say, I want to study more, I want to go and...
I think I always wanted to as a young age, and I think I was wanting to study languages, and I've always been quite determined to do that. So, and things opened up in the 90s. There were more students going to university, so it was one good thing, I suppose, of the Thatcher government is really opening up education to everybody. So I was able to benefit from some of the changes that were made in the 90s.
And so then, I guess, what was university like in the UK in the 90s? Like, what was that? What were the campuses like? What were the people like?
So where I went, Sunderland was a polytechnic. It became a university, and there were more students going. It was just eye-opening. Got involved in the students' union. I was the sports editor of the newspaper. So it was just fun. It was just being able to find your voice and just having access to, I suppose, more economic opportunities, I suppose, when leaving university. So it was just heaps of travelling, went to America, spent a semester in France and Germany, so just able to see more of the world and more of life.
And, when you're learning languages, right, like, so I guess having studied languages at university, then going to the countries, what were some of the things that you picked up that was there any parts of what you were taught in the classroom that just totally didn't translate?
It was just... In German, you're taught like Hochdeutsch, so you can imagine if students or speakers of other languages are going to learn English, they're going to learn it in London. Yeah, they're going to go maybe speak with C pronunciation, or BBC Newsreader's accent, but then go into, say, Liverpool in the UK. Yeah, and it's a very, very different accent. Right? So it was a savior to do it, actually learning how people speak rather than what was taught at university. But just cultural differences as well. You just times people eat and how things work, and Germany was far more progressive than the UK when it came to public transport, when it came to quality of life. But like the shops would close early and things wouldn't be available. So it was just certain things which I think you look at and you think, I'm so pleased to have experienced this, and you've got access to another culture and meet other people from all over the world. Yeah,
there's a great saying. I don't know if it's a great saying, but it's a good saying in Chinese where we talk about language being the gateway to culture. Yeah. All right. And so a lot of the times, if you don't understand the local language, some of those things are lost in translation because certain words, like, you can't translate from one language to another. Like, I guess you can talk about the concepts, but it's still very difficult to translate. And I'll give you an example in Chinese where we talk about this idea of mianzi, which means like face, like pride, right? And basically, Chinese people are very proud, and so sometimes, like, there's this idea of saving face, where if you know that this is going to be a difficult thing for that particular parent to talk about or whatever, you try and avoid the conversation, or you sort of shift it away. Were there any sort of, I guess, when you reflect back on your learnings in German and French, where there was any eye-openers in terms of, like, where the language helped you to really understand their culture a lot better?
Well, I think just in French, different forms of view. There was like the tu and the vous. There was like informal and formal, and there are more versions of you in German. But it actually opening in terms of like how you speak with different people, with mates, the language you use with mates versus, say, the language going for a job interview or a business meeting. Yep. So it's very much just that the power of language to communicate, to connect, how to be respectful. When you mentioned earlier about not losing face, I learned many years ago, when you hand over a business card, to hold two hands, and to receive both hands, and to actually look at the business card. Yep. And I heard a story about 20 years ago. There was a business meeting in Japan, and there was an American at somebody's business card and was using it as a toothpick.
Oh, no.
And apparently, like the president of the company just said, "You need to leave here right now." But
Yeah.
just those, if you can just find a few ways of just being respectful, saying please or thank you. Like, I think you say "nin hao" rather than
Ni hao, yeah, or
"ni hao."
Ni hao, yeah.
It's just a politer form.
Yeah, seniority kind of thing.
Yeah.
There's times when it works in reverse though, and it's actually detrimental. Like I think South Korea is like an example of this. So they worked out in flight control that it was better for the flight controllers to speak in English because the language is geared so that when somebody's older than you, there's automatically a difference in the way that you speak to them based on the term that you refer to them as.
Yeah.
So I think there was an incident where like the flight controller didn't listen because obviously they felt like they're the older one, they should command respect. No, this is the decision we're making, and because it was all communicated in Korean, right? Whereas when they switched it to English, they take away that aspect of seniority, and we're just purely focusing on the task. So, I think there's, and that's one of the beauties of learning multiple languages, right?
You just think you travel, you meet other people, the ability to just have a conversation with another person by exchanging a few words, like one conversation can make a tremendous difference. The people you meet, how do you feel when you can communicate with someone, just saying the basics, hello, how are you?
Yeah, you feel more connected to that person. Out of curiosity, because and I guess the background to this is that my wife and I, we went to Europe on our honeymoon, and so France is always very interesting because people talk about how they prefer you to try and speak in French. At least if you try, they'll make more of an effort with you versus if you just try and communicate in English. Did you experience that? Like,
very much so. I mean, the fact that I was able to speak French and my accent wasn't as good as some of the other students, but people would actually make an effort and correct the words I was using. I can remember using Ansprechung in Germany for an appointment, and the woman there said no, termin, and so it was just people would actually improve your language because they would know you were trying. And for me it just comes down to basic respect. If you're going somewhere, just at least learn how to say please and thank you or hello.
I think that's a great way. I think far too often people get self-conscious when it comes to learning language. Like, you don't put yourself out there. And I think especially like if you are like, say, if it's your mother tongue or you're from that region or whatever, like you get very self-conscious about it. Like I know for me as a Chinese speaking guy, like I get self-conscious talking to Chinese speakers, native Chinese speakers, because I was born here and I know that my language skills aren't quite as good. But then, if you don't try, you'll never improve it as a result of it. So it becomes a bit of a catch-22. Whereas, I often like, when I go to like a European country, like people look at me and they know that I'm not a local. So I can try my best to say whatever and they're going to be, they'll be impressed, right? It's just like when people try and speak Chinese and, white people or foreigners speak Chinese, Chinese people are always very impressed. I've got a friend who's currently in Vienna. Shout out to Alex. He's been on the podcast before, but I often comment his Chinese is better than mine. Like he studied Chinese at university, lived in Shanghai, did all that, and I was like, we actually do a Chinese speaking podcast together, and it's always interesting to sort of pick things up from him. He has we both view the culture and the language in a very similar way because we're both guys that grew up in Australia that speak this other language, and him through later learning, and me from growing up with it. So it's quite interesting to see how our perspectives on things sort of intersect.
Just the ability to understand uniqueness. And it's something as simple, you both speak the same language, but you both speak it in different ways with different accents, and you can have a conversation around just the two of you and how you speak Chinese. Then just the impact of you and another person who I'm going to go to Beijing on holiday in 3 weeks, and you taught me 5 words to say. And then I was able to use those 5 words when checking in at the hotel every time I bought something. The smile, I can just imagine the smile on somebody's face. I'm not one of these embarrassing Western tourists who refuse to speak anything of the language, but just that difference in our minds when we know somebody's made an effort to be respectful and just that spark of a conversation.
I think that is the key, right? Like it's that effort, putting in that effort to try and meet the person where they're at. And, you may not get it right, that's fine. But at least you tried, and at least, I think that's what breaks down the walls, right? Like I think when people just go in with these preconceived ideas about how the conversation's going to go or what's going to happen, like, you know, let's explore it. Let's find out together. Like that's the only way it's a meeting of the mind, so to speak.
Absolutely. And, you know, it was a bit touchy a few moments ago, and those pieces. But what I was doing very deliberately was taking a firm stand on something, and you were coming from a certain viewpoint. Yeah. But we got there in the end.
We got to understand each other, you know. Yeah. And I'm glad you were able to say, hey, no, they're two totally different things. Yeah. Because I think people need to understand that. You know, I don't, and that's why I say it's good. I think the idea, what's it called, concept creep. You know, like you're taking one line of thinking and you're trying to apply it as a blanket statement onto everything where it may not necessarily apply, right? But anyway, let's move forward from that. So I guess out of your, you've done quite a bit of traveling, right? So you mentioned France, you mentioned Germany. Do you have any favorites?
Brazil.
I
went there in 2016 and I've been back 5 times. I love South America, I love Africa.
What is it about Brazil? I've never been,
Brazil,
so I'm curious.
Especially Rio. I did. It's like Sydney. Why I fell in love with Sydney. There's the culture, the vibe, the climate, just that real spirit of life, which I think we have in Australia. I just think Sydney's just got that edge with that large, vibrant city, very LGBTQ plus friendly. It's what I describe as like La Vida. You go to Brazil, you just feel like this instant connection with people. I've made some tremendous friendships. I've been to Chile, I've been to Argentina, I've been to Colombia, which I really love. Went over to Peru. So I've done I've been to Costa Rica and Guatemala. So I've done quite a few countries in South America. And in Africa, I've been to Ghana, I've been to Zimbabwe, South Africa and Togo. There's more of Africa to go and do, but just...
Any touchy moments when you've been over in those places? Like, I guess, you know, people always worry about the safety and security when you go to those sorts of places. Have you got any stories to share?
There was one moment in Manaus, which is a beautiful city in the middle of the Amazon. Was walking around and this guy was trying to sell me a T-shirt. Yep. And I said no, and then he just grabbed my T-shirt.
What, he literally just grabbed
it? Just grabbed it, and then I just put my hand up and I shouted no. And that was enough to scare him to walk away. Another moment was hearing all of these firecrackers in Rio, and then the local telling me, oh, actually, that goes off in the favelas because the gangs are letting the other gangs know that the police are coming in. Oh. But then just the friendships I've made and, you know, being up into the favelas with a good friend who's a tour guide and just been able to see where he lives, and it's like, wow, just the inequity. There's a train line in Rio, once you go past like the main metro station, you see in like a few stops, there are no supermarkets. Just whole areas where people can't even get access to basic food that you can get in a supermarket, and just the inequity.
Yeah, the firecrackers one is an interesting one because when you were talking about that actually brought something to my mind. Like, so I used to do a lot of lion dancing, you know, Chinese traditional lion dancing, and so I remember, you know, this would have been like early 2000s or something like that, and we're doing lion dancing in the streets of Cabramatta with all the firecrackers and things like that. But rather than, you know, the firecrackers obviously being to alert the cops, like sometimes gangs would actually use the firecrackers as cover for gunfire. Yeah. And so there was one year where there was a shooting that happened as a result of it. But yeah, it's interesting. Like, that's what came to my mind when I'm thinking about firecrackers going off, and especially, you know, if there is gang violence in those sorts of lower socioeconomic areas, like can be get very sketchy, right? Like,
and it can. Once you get past the actual people who are doing it, it's very much a tiny minority. Just the people living here.
Yeah, the sense of community would have been phenomenal.
Oh, absolutely phenomenal. Just being able to meet somebody, go to a bar, go to a restaurant, and I think me spending a few dollars, you think how that's going to impact that community. You know, very much around removing barriers for communities, for people. You know, being able to go to university or having access to public transport, just some basic things. The difference somebody can have by being able to get on a bus, they can get a job. Yeah, not having to walk 4 hours. Just being able to get on and get somewhere within half an hour.
Yeah. Any favourite foods from any of these places? Like, I guess is there one standout? If you had to pick one type of food that you've tried or something that really...
I can't remember. There's a was a fish from the Amazon. It was just like
Fish from the Amazon?
yeah, I can't remember the name of it, but it was, they recommended it and just went to a local restaurant. There's this beautiful fish.
That's cool. So, okay, so then when you, so we're talking about university, you finished university, you did some travel in university, went to France and Germany. What happened after that? Like, what did you move into work-wise?
Worked for a company called British Telecom, which is the equivalent of Telstra. So
Yep.
I joined their graduate program and was a call center manager for a few years.
Yep. Oh, out of curiosity though, so when you left high school or when you left university, did you have any idea what it is that you wanted to do?
No,
Completely none.
none.
Okay. So then you went and studied languages in university, and then it's like, so the job with British Telecom, was that something that came about because it was just available, or was it something?
It was available. My first job after leaving, I used to work in pubs as a student, but I spent about a year working as an operator on international directory inquiries, and there was a job came up as a team manager, and it was only available to graduates, so I applied for that role, and I was recruited into that position. So that was just a big opportunity. And I came to Australia a few times, and BT had an office in Sydney.
Oh, wow.
So I made contact with the BT office in Sydney, and I kept ringing up every week, give me a job. And they said, just come out here and we'll give you a job. And that's what I did.
Really?
It came with working. I quit a job in the UK.
So it wasn't a transfer. It was like you just saying, hey, give me a job, give me a job. And they said, come over.
Come
and then
over.
You're like, okay.
And I did. Working holiday visa, and then they gave me a job here, and then I got a 457 visa shortly afterwards because I was on a sponsored business visa, but you need the guts to go and do it.
I really like that because I think a lot of times, when people fall into that trap where they might not be happy where they are. So as an example, you want to come to Australia, but you've actually taken that next step of saying, okay, I'm going to remove the safety net. You've cut away the safety net. Whereas a lot of people go, okay, before you leave that job, make sure you find your next job, right? And sometimes I feel like having that safety net actually prohibits you from chasing some of those opportunities, right?
I would often have conversations. I used to work on the help desk, and it was working like really bad hours, 12 hours on, 12 hours off for the first 2.5 years, but I was still living a great life here. And people would say, oh, how do I get a job here? And then I say, you need to do this. And they go, oh, in order for me to come over, I'll need this, 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 and this. Well, you're already creating additional barriers on what you need in order to get out here. So unless these conditions were met, you won't come out here. I doubt you'll get a job out here unless you apply as a permanent resident, but to actually work for the company for them to transfer you. They'll do that for, the executive for the region or somebody else. But somebody who's lower down the rung, they're not going to just offer you a magic carpet to meet all of your conditions to come out here. You're going to have to take some risks and have some guts to do it. Otherwise, it won't happen.
Have you always had that initiative? Like, was that something that, do you feel like you developed that over time, or do you feel like that was something that you always had inside?
I think it's always been there. Didn't always have the confidence to believe that or follow through. Used to be too much what other people thought. But I've always had that.
That's a pretty big step to take then. If you're working at British Telecom and then it's like, you build up a little bit of relationship. It's like, okay, I'm going to cut the safety net and just go. Like, I guess were there any other factors that helped to motivate you down that pathway, or was you just really wanted to get?
I just wanted to be in Australia, and that was a vehicle to do it. So it was actually the safest in terms of from a economic.
Because you already established a
relationship there and coming out here. So
and then I guess so once you came out here, like I guess were there any changes in terms of your perspective about what Australia was versus when you were holidaying versus when you're living here?
I'll tell you, just because in '99 I actually spent a week living with a mate rather than being in a hotel, so I actually got to see what life was like in terms of living and working. And it was getting my place for the first time and setting things up. I had no safety net apart from networks that I created, but there was very much a good quality of life and a focus on quality of life that I felt Australia had the edge over the UK.
It's one of those, it's a very interesting thing. Like, I feel like we're so fortunate to be in this country. When I think about it, it's that old Einstein quote, on shoulders of giants, basically. I'm so grateful that my parents came to this country and I could be born in this country and get all the opportunities that are available to us here. And it's one of those things, as the Einstein quote goes, if there's any reason why I can see further than the people before me, it's just because I stand on their shoulders, right? And stand on the shoulders of giants. So it's one of those. When I reflect on it, it's like, you know, I didn't do anything special to get here. You know what I mean? Like, I'm so fortunate. It's just that my parents decided to go here, and I'm just fortunate to be born to them. Right?
But you've made the most of living here.
Yeah. Well, I guess so. Like, I don't really... that's an interesting one because, you know, what defines making the most? Like...
For me, it's like success. For me, a great definition of success, you know, is time well spent. I would often describe a weekend in Sydney. I'd walk up the street, literally walk up the street. The beach was the end of the street. 32 degrees, great beach, there the day, and now like 10 minutes I'm home.
Yeah.
It's like walk up the street, feels like you've been away for a weekend in the Mediterranean, but getting on a flight from Gatwick in Lowell Heathrow, spending a weekend, then going back. What did you do this weekend? I went to the beach.
Yeah.
I just decided to go on a Sunday lunchtime, came back at 5 o'clock, spent great time with mates, and we're all home and then we're ready for work the next day. But I just think that lifestyle difference is there because I made that choice to come out here. Yeah. But I've made the most of what's available to me. So I've made the most of enjoying that weekend. I suppose that's really how I would define that.
Yeah, that's a nice definition. I'm curious on your thoughts on this because this is something that I was actually just thinking about early this morning. That often in life, you know, we have this goal or a destination that we want to get to, right? And so we work so hard to get to this goal, and then we achieve this goal, and then it's like, okay, now what? You know, we set another goal, or you know, we might keep barreling along down that pathway, and like for me at the present moment, you know, I don't necessarily have a fixed goal in mind in terms of where I want to go, but all I know is that I'm heading in this direction, right? So I head down this pathway in this direction. Eventually I'm going to get to wherever the destination is. But I think, you know, part of the cool thing about doing it this way is that because there's no end goal in mind, I'm not constrained by time. Like I'm not rushing to get there. Yeah. So it's like I can stop along the way, smell the roses, do whatever I need to do and not have this anxiety that, I need to be here at this particular time. So I'm a bit curious on your thoughts on that. Like, you know, does that speak to you at all?
So
or?
I guess one learning for me has been don't attach your happiness to an outcome. And things happen in life. You know, I didn't get the grades to do this, but I got the grades to do that. You know,
Is there a story behind that? Like, was there something that, you know, an outcome that you were hoping for and maybe didn't go your way, or it did go your way and it just didn't provide you with the right fulfillment?
So my A-level results, you know, I didn't get the grades to go to a university that I particularly wanted to go to. Yeah. But I went to the right university for me.
Okay.
So, you know, the opportunities that I had at the university I went to had a great 4 years. Yep. Would I have had those same opportunities at another university? I don't know, but probably would have made the most of it. Yeah. But I went to university and I was always what I call part-time confidence. No, perfectionism was always there. Somebody else was better than me, but without actually realising what I was achieving myself. So if you can... I always believe in having a strong vision. You know, you want to do something, you can see it in your mind, but you have to be flexible and you have to be adaptable to the outcome. You know, a 100-metre swimming race in a 50-metre pool, you have to do one tumble turn. Yep. You have to dive off the blocks. You know, we've seen the dolphins do exceptionally well in the last few weeks at the World Swimming Championships. It's been 20 years since they did quite so well. But they've been motivated this year. You've actually just seen that spirit. I remember the 2008 Olympics where the men's 4x100 metre relay team thought, we're going to win this. You know, didn't get there. Yeah. Their outcome was in their mind. Yeah. But that's all it was. It was like a pipe dream because you have to win the race. You have to do the hard work. Yeah. But how about if you're the 5th or 6th place person in the team, you missed out on the opportunity because others were like so convinced they're going to do something. If you're the 5th place person and you were swapped with somebody else and you were so more determined, you might have won the race for the team. Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting one because, and we'll talk about the boxing and stuff as we sort of progress. But, you know, it's one of those things that you can't teach heart. That's what they always say. No. Right? And so when certain things have happened in your life that motivate you to go down a specific pathway, you barrel along at this with an intensity, like it's almost... for lack of a better word, violent, you know, in the way that you chase those goals, right? And so then when you do operate in that particular way, there's no other outcome than to be successful. So there was a boxing match a few years ago, Floyd Mayweather, Logan Paul. Yep. there was a CNN article, and in there a boxing historian was quoted saying the sport that he loved is over, and I disagreed.
Yep.
I did a bit of research on the journalist. He'd written about LGBTQ plus sport, connected with him on LinkedIn, and found his email address, sent an email. 2 weeks later, I was being interviewed for an article for CNN.
Wow.
And my take was, actually I'm talking about this, but the boxing historian is looking in the wrong location. Looking at this gym right now, I just see how vibrant it is. You have so many people training, different ages, training. Now there's a UFC match coming to Australia in September. Now for me, the heart and spirit of UFC, you can find in this gym. Will any of these people, this gym right now, compete in UFC? I don't know. But the future of UFC is in gyms like this, because without gyms like this, where will the next UFC star come from?
Yeah, that's a really great point. You know, like, I think the numbers are something like there's 600 million fans of the UFC worldwide, right? I think that's the number. I might be wrong here, but somebody can tell me if I'm misquoting that. But, you know, so if you think about that, like, the reality is, like, majority of those fans may never ever step foot inside of a gym. But if there was a way to sort of activate them to get more involved with the sport and actually, you know, look at it as a potential way for health and fitness and things like that, like, the potential's absolutely immense, right? Like, I feel like in majority of combat sports, and boxing to a lesser extent, because there is at the top level anyway, lots of money in boxing. Obviously, you know, to get there, the steps that you need to get there, it's like the old digging for diamonds, right? Like, a lot of people give up before they finally make the breakthrough, because, as we know, with combat sports, it's very unforgiving. You know, you don't play the sport, you either live and breathe it, or you face, you know, adversity on the way through, and you realise, hey, perhaps this isn't the right direction for me. But yeah, you're so right in the sense that, you know, you have this sort. The way that you worded it was beautiful in the sense that, like, you're very forward thinking in terms of the next crop of athletes. They're not, you know, there already. It's the people that are coming through the system that will then generate the next generation of athletes, so to speak.
No, I've never trained at this gym, but I can see there's a great culture at this gym.
Yeah.
Imagine you're 14 years old, you've never done anything to do with combat sports in the past, and you try here, you love it.
Yeah.
Then maybe in 5 years' time, you're competing on the world stage.
Yeah.
But it's your emotions, your experiences that you get at your first gym.
Yeah.
And I'm sure at this gym they could really prepare you well for competing at your first competition, even getting away to the UFC.
Yeah.
But when that culture is there,
Yeah.
and people are coming here, they love it, they've got that support, that camaraderie. That's why I say the heart and spirit of boxing combat sports is always in the community. And I think you find that with any sport. How often do you go out and about on a Saturday or Sunday, you see kids playing soccer, kids playing AFL, and the parents are there on all of those clubs. Imagine if those clubs weren't there. Would AFL be so popular in Australia? I don't think so.
Yeah, you're 100% right. Like, that's one of those things. And I think it's that first experience in the sport, right? Like, that's make or break for some people. I talk about this a lot, you know, when people compete for the first time. So if they jump in onto the mats for a jiu-jitsu match, or into a boxing ring, or into the cage, you know, if you go into that first match and you get absolutely destroyed in your first fight or first competition, you're going to be less likely to want to come back to it, because it wasn't, you know, you're just like, I'm rubbish at this sport and I shouldn't be doing it because I'm going to get seriously hurt, or that experience just didn't lend itself to having a good one, right? But if your first experience with the sport where, you know, maybe you didn't get the outcome that you wanted, but it was a very competitive match, you're more encouraged to then go and say, oh, I'm going to get back in the gym, I'm going to get back to work,
you're going to get
come
back,
back,
all those things.
Right? So let's segue into that a little bit, because I'm curious about the boxing experience, but I do want to come back to sort of talk about your workplace journey and all that. So can we just segue into boxing? Because I'm curious about what your first foray into boxing was like, because you found the sport later in life as well.
Yeah,
right?
so basically I mentioned earlier, I almost died from Addison's disease. And then to help with PTSD, the dreams I had in my coma are kind of still with me. It's describing it as a nightmare that I can't get out of.
Can you sort of, and if you're okay to talk about it, but like, what were the dreams like? Like, what would happen in these dreams?
So one dream was I'd been taken to a hospital, and there was a nurse. Every time she was unhappy, she would put this painful fluid on my left hand, and I couldn't leave that hospital. Another dream is there was an entity which was killing every single member of my family, like going from cousin to cousin, down in age, and then was coming towards me. Not sure how that one ended, but I'm still here. But those are the realities that I created around me when I was in my comas, and those experiences.
And I guess just speaking on the one where this entity killing your family members, like did anything happen in reality in terms of that? When I say that, like, you know, did you lose any family members?
No,
okay.
no. Literally, it was just like this kind of entity was just coming, and it was like every single member of the family would. It was always like around the fireplace. It's such a vivid memory, but it's such a vibrant memory within me. And I describe the dreams and the comas as like a living nightmare you can't get out of. And I'm saying what was happening. This is my natural voice because I've got damage in a vocal cord.
Wow.
So imagine waking up and you have a tube in your throat and you can't speak. You know, you can't move. You know, dropping 20 kilos in the space of a few weeks. Don't eat or drink for about 6 weeks because you can't. Because you have a tube up your nose. You actually have wires coming out. You actually have tubes in your neck. You're not being able to move. And having to learn to walk again.
So, you know, when it came to speaking, so how did you overcome that? Like, you obviously had to retrain the way that you speak.
So, for the first few days, I had to press down on my trachea to speak.
Wow, so it just couldn't create any vibration or something?
It was just, I think, because I'd had the tracheotomy and I had the tracheal tube for about 10 days. And then I learnt to get my natural voice again. I was at home and had to use my diaphragm. So this was my voice for a good 12, 18 months.
Wow.
And then people would say, it doesn't sound like you today. So having a conversation with somebody and they know who you are, but then suddenly you're speaking in such a different way.
You could play some mean pranks on people like that. You could call them and be like, hello. You know, like, it's just amazing how, like, it just switches on. You can switch it on and off like that. Like when you first did it, I was a bit, whoa, what
that's the thing. That's something which is with me, will be with me for life. But I had to learn again when I found that I could do it. It was like getting my voice back. There was one guy who actually only knew me with this voice.
Oh wow!
And when I spoke, and he just didn't realise it was me. And so that was a near experience. But basically, from almost dying and having combat sports training and self-defense training and boxing. What I was doing was cataloguing my journey on Instagram. People used to say Martin could never punch his way out of a paper bag. Then they were saying, Martin, how's your boxing training going? Then I was interviewed by the BBC Sport and the LGBTQ Sports podcast. And for about 2 hours one day, there was 3 stories on BBC Sport Bob's page. One was Muhammad Ali. One was Martin Stark, one was Anthony Joshua. So for about three matches for about 2 hours, you know, so it's up there.
So okay, so then you know, you started the boxing journey obviously to try and get your health back on track and do those sorts of things. I guess, what was your first experience going into the boxing gym?
So it was just never thought I would do boxing, but I discovered something which I thought I could do. I never realised I could do. I used to say boxing was almost barbaric for me. You know, I wasn't at the stage it should be banned, but I describe it as a butcher deciding to become a vegan, or the other way around. You know, that big step change, and I just continued doing it, and just really, really loved it, and that just completely changed the direction of my life in a way that I never thought would happen.
Isn't it funny? I think there's a lot of people that look at combat sports like that. They go, oh, you know, the UFC, it's barbaric, you know. Oh, you know, they're fighting in a cage. You know, people say that sort of stuff. And but once you actually experience, you know, the benefits of training, you know, like when you walk in, it's not like you walk into a gym and suddenly you're thrown in the cage and you're getting bashed. It's like, okay, let's go back to the basics. Let's talk about, you know, how should you actually stand? How should you actually move? How do you throw these techniques? How do you punch? How do you kick? You know, how do you do all these different things, right? And, you know, you're progressively taking up the hierarchy of skills required until you get to that point where it's like, okay, if you want to compete, why not? Have the experience. Because as you'll probably attest to, you know, people can talk about it all they like, but until you've actually been in there and experienced it, it changes your whole perspective on it, doesn't it?
Oh, completely. I mean, I had a fight almost 2 years ago, and I went through the corporate fighter program. Just honestly really took care of me.
Yep.
Because one thing, having Addison's disease, my body doesn't produce cortisol.
Yep.
And I get tired very quickly with lots of activity. So I'd have to take more cortisol before it was training.
Yep.
And sometimes, you know, sparring so many rounds, like I'm actually just tiring out.
Yep.
And had great care and attention.
Yep.
From that. So I was able, I had to adapt to the training, but the training also had to adapt to me. I have a great boxing coach, Monday Junction.
Yep.
And again, he always makes sure I'm okay. They'll push, but when I say, look, actually, you know,
You're done.
like,
Yeah.
I'm done, or I need time out.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of any sport. If you find a good coach, if you find a good club to go to, and they will accommodate you in terms of any things that you may need from a health perspective or something else.
Yeah.
And then you obviously need to adapt to them, because sometimes we do need pushing along. Now you'll be okay, one more round and you'll be fine. You just need to be able to do that. I think that's the beauty. When I was coming back to about the culture of a gym,
Yeah.
you know, I can sense that here right away.
Yeah.
You're seeing
The energy.
people coming in, the energy, there's the music, you're seeing different people coming in, and like, this would be a great place to train. And
Yeah.
can you imagine going into another gym where it was like all well-built guys bashing each other's guts out, and you're 11 years old, you're like, oh, we actually do children's classes,
Yeah.
but you're going to go, well, there's no image here of children seeing on your website. You're going to think, I'm not really spending time, but I think that's the difference.
Yeah. No, you're so right. Like, I feel like combat sports often gets this, you know, that idea that, you know, it's a meathead sport.
Yeah.
You know, it's barbaric or whatever. But once you actually, you know, experience it, it can be very life-changing in terms of even like lifestyle and discipline. Like, you know, when I talk about myself, I often say that I'm not a fighter, I'm a martial artist. You know, yes, I've fought, but for me, martial arts became more of a lifestyle choice. You know, it's my chosen method of exercise, you know, rather than, you know, I'm going and lifting weights or doing like that. I'd rather go and, you know, do martial arts. That's just the life that I've chosen. And so as a result of that, it's like, that becomes a discipline. You know, it's a habit, you know, and if I don't get my training in, obviously I'm not a very nice person to be around, because you need to exert yourself and get that frustration out, right? Let's go back a little bit, because I just want to finish off on that vein that we were talking about in terms of when you came to Australia with British Telecom, and I'm a little bit curious about, you know, how you went from British Telecom into where you are today in terms of all those sorts of things.
So I left BT at the beginning of 2006, and I had a year off for working because of the illness.
Yep.
And my kind of next role at BT was actually installing products and services, and, you know, coordinating the provision of, you know, IT services, all these countries all over the world. And I used to interact with suppliers.
Okay.
So I wanted to do supplier management procurement. So that was my next career. And I spent 15 years in technology procurement, negotiating with hardware companies, software companies, the likes of IBM's, Telstra's, Salesforce. And the biggest contract I did was a $300 million technology outsourcing contract.
Wow.
You know, I won an award for that. I was able to get like $50 million of savings for the company I was working for. And so just being able to work on the big end of town of commercial deals, you know, negotiating with chief executives, and that was fun. And then I spent 2 years working at Sydney Uni. And I tell you, I just loved Sydney Uni, just a vibrant culture. I was on a contract for 7 months, and then COVID, and the contract ended. And I went back. It's the only company I've actually gone back to. I spent a year working on a project in the Sydney Uni IT team. When you actually see the students graduating, you can see the purpose of why you're there. When you see the students' Freshers Week, you know, they see all
bright face,
so bright face, and they're going to be like different clubs and societies. You know, there's all of this nonsense about there being no free speech on campuses. I mean, you just have different societies. You see that all the posters on the university campus, and you think the impact you can make in what you do. And I think that's been a big driver of me. It's one of the reasons why I really love Sydney Union. If everyone needs to go back to the corporate world or the world of work, I'd love to go back to the university sector.
Do you feel like, so obviously it's been a long time since I've been in uni as well. So I graduated in 2006. So, you know, that's over 15 years or something, something like that. Anyway, do you find like, because what you mentioned there about, you know, there's no free speech in unis, but you can see all the different societies, like, do you feel like the conversations are facilitated well? Like, do you feel like people are communicating well, or is there?
I still think there is free speech at universities.
Yeah.
I think it's a smokescreen.
You think it's just my experience. What do you think drives that then? Why do you think there's this almost like a narrative?
I
to
think
sort of
this
say
world
there's
we've become so polarized. There's so much anger. I mean, right now, the Barbie movie is it still the most popular movie at the moment?
Yeah.
There was a US commentator, he burned a Barbie doll on his podcast.
Really?
And I'm like, why? What are you angry about? If you don't want to watch it,
Just don't watch
that's
it.
fine.
Yeah.
Can you imagine somebody, I think it's too woke, but you have like a 4-year-old and 6-year-old daughter, Daddy, can you go take her to see the Barbie movie?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a movie that if you don't want to watch it, that's fine. But people have become so angry about things, and I don't know what people are angry about. We've got to find a way of cutting through and finding unity. And as human beings, we solve things by working together.
Yeah, well, that's the foundations of society, right?
Yeah.
Is that society's created off this idea that, you know, we're using mutual cooperation for to get somewhere, you know, to establish things, to grow as people, right? So I feel like there's a micro level. So we as human beings, as individuals, need to experience growth and development to feel like we're living, so to speak. You know, because there's two ways to look at it. You're either living or you're just slowly dying, right? So, so they're the two ways that you can look at it, right? But then when you sort of zoom out a little bit, so as an individual, how do you now fit into the bigger picture in terms of society? And, you know, I think that's, there was a study that was done based on like this idea of, you know, is there objective morality, so to speak? And the answer was actually yes, when they did like 65 studies across all these different cultures and things like that. Like the whole idea is that, so even if we take like a tribe as an example, and a more primitive tribe, and if you were to ask them, you know, okay, is it right that you kill your friend? They would say, no, absolutely not, right? Like they already understand this concept. They have this innate concept that killing would be wrong. But then where it gets lost in translation is like, okay, is it right to kill this person from the other tribe? And then they'd be like, well, yeah, they're not the same as us, right? Like, so straight away, it's that concept of othering people. You know, we go and make them the other so that, okay, well, they're not the same as us. So it's okay to do these bad things or treat them not the same as how I would treat my friends. When the reality is that, you know, well, once you start to zoom out again and you realize that, hey, we're all actually a lot more similar than we're not, you know, you can take away a lot of those barriers. But how do we facilitate those conversations? Like, you know, you and I, you know, we got into a tense moment, and we could respectfully, you know, talk about it and navigate our way around it and still move on with the conversation and have a great conversation. Whereas some people might have just said, look, I'm not doing this, I'm out, right? And I feel like, you know, how do we facilitate more of those conversations is probably the interesting question, right? Like, that's why I'm grateful for you to come on and obviously share your thoughts and perspectives.
So we start from a place of respect, start from a place of courtesy, start from a place of inclusion. Right now, are you motivated and driven by anger? Are you scared of people who are being angry and you're so angry about something because there's always like another enemy at the moment, these culture wars, and I avoid them. And I don't get involved. I'll speak up about issues, try to come up with the solution, but I don't get involved in like day-to-day dramas because there'll always be something, but I get involved in these are the issues. So a few days ago in New York City, a 28-year-old black queer man was murdered. Now, there are reports that it was a hate crime. So like a 20-year-old man just started his life, so happy in life, that was ended because of hate. Now, hate crimes are increasing. You know, I had to go to the police twice last year for the boxing championships. One was a cyber stalker. One was somebody sending me like a really nasty email. And I take a firm stand. You mentioned it earlier because I won't stand for nonsense. I'll walk away. I'll block. But if something is starting to invade my personal space or it's affecting my health, I'll go to the police. I have no issues if somebody was, you know, being horrible and being threatening. I'm like, well, what does that say about you? Because most bullies are scared of their own shadow. When we think about all of these keyboard warriors, what are they without their keyboards?
Well, you would have experienced probably a lot of that, right?
Heaps.
Can you share a few examples, just so like I think it's nice to talk about, because then people that are experiencing online, you know, hate or bullying or whatever can sort of maybe resonate with what some of the experiences that you've had.
So I had a death threat just over 4 years ago. Am I still alive? You know, so I blocked and reported. I was in hospital in I think 2020, And Out Magazine, which is a big LGBTQ plus publication, had done an article about me and then posted it on Facebook. And I was on Facebook, and there was this guy in America who was saying, oh, here's this Martin Stark, he's an idiot, all of these things. We're exchanging conversations. And after about the fourth message exchange, he went, oh my goodness, you're the guy that we're talking about. You should see his tone changed. It was like, oh yeah, because he was embarrassed because actually it wasn't some other person. I'm actually having the conversation. It's like if we were having a conversation and people were being disrespectful for one of us two, we'd both turn around and say, hey, you need to stop that. But if we heard two other people being disrespectful, we think, oh God, I really don't want to be around those people. But he realised he was actually looking into him psychologically, because he's saying all of these mean things. And I'm like, mate, having no impact. And he went, oh, and you could see the change in his tone. But for me, the best defences of what we learn in boxing and UFC, the walk away and the block. If somebody's going to be mean and nasty, unless you've been like threatening, it's impacting your health, walk away. Especially on social media, or block and report. You know, then the only voice they have is their own voice. And I'm sure if somebody
talking to the wall,
and if the message they're hearing is hateful, they don't want to be in place in hate for too long, because it's not very nice. Narcissists don't like it when you hold up a mirror and say, this is what you're like.
Well, it's like that saying, you know, hate is like drinking the poison and hoping the other person dies, right? So yeah, like it's one of those things. I feel like when it comes to, especially online, there's plenty of keyboard warriors, right? And I sort of worked out very early on, you know, when the internet was coming around, and I grew up with obviously the internet as well. It was just one of those things that I learnt that there's two kinds of people, and I don't mean this in any disrespectful way, but this is the way that was sort of worded to me in terms of how I picked up on it. It was like, you know, there are people who create things and do things, and then there are people that talk about it, right? And they're actually both the same people, but you have a choice. You got a choice to either do things, create things, experience your own journey, go down the pathways and explore the things that you want to explore, or you got a choice to talk about other people doing it, right? And you know, and I don't mean the people talking about it are necessarily always saying bad things. Sometimes they're saying good things, right? And you need that as well, because you need people to engage as well. And there's nothing stopping you from being both. You know, you can create things and also facilitate great conversations. But if you're the person just putting out lots of negativity and putting out lots of vitriol, then, you know, and you're not creating anything, well, you know, you probably need to go away and look at your life a little bit more and sort of say, you know, what am I actually doing? You know, and you're sort of projecting, you know, some of those negative emotions probably onto somebody else.
And I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, 2-time top voice. And I can tell you from my time in procurement, when a supplier got angry, you know, if you got to shout at an executive, your chances of doing business again with the company are gone. You know, left the room, I'm like, I never want to deal with that person again. You know, had to. So imagine you're on Keyboard Warrior, making all these comments. Other people see. People form an opinion of you. They're like, oh my goodness, I never realised this person was like that. I don't want to spend time with that person anymore. Versus, oh wow, I've actually seen what this person is like, what they're saying. I want to support them. It's like 95% of people on LinkedIn who look at your posts don't engage with either some kind of emotional, like a like or a support or a comment, but they're seeing it. So do you want people to see you in the best light possible, or do they want to see you when you're being angry or being a bit of a bully? Because those opinions, we have a conversation with somebody. I remember what that person was like. They may have changed, but we remember that last interaction. And all of those things. So it comes back to place of respect. Place of. I'm going to change the subject slightly. I watched a YouTube video a few weeks ago. It's like the world's highest bridges. And just seeing all of these bridges in China, and it's like, oh my goodness, never mind. Can you imagine walking over them, but just the architecture. And it was like so beautiful, this beautiful countryside. And I'm just thinking how those bridges are connecting communities. And I'm like, imagine just being able to walk over that bridge, see this beautiful countryside. You might be 300 meters up. There are other bridges in Europe, but I thought just the ingenuity and just the beauty in the architecture. And it just made me think about people constructing the bridge. And imagine if there's a documentary about all these bridges that were being built. We've seen documentaries of other bridges, but imagine if we actually learned the approach the daily lives of people, and we got the opportunity to experience that culture through the eyes of somebody else, who listening to another person, and what understanding we would get just through. And it just reminded us, like, wow, I never knew about these bridges. I'm like, oh my goodness, they just like so off, like 300 meters above ground, and I'm like, oh my goodness. And just been able to see how that one bridge was able to connect a community. It may have been kind of cut off because of the landscape.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, because it's like, I think when you meet people, it's like people are always very quick to formulate an opinion, right? And it's only when you can meet them on that common ground that you can sort of establish the similarities first. Like, and I can give you a prime example of this. So, you know, I ran in the federal election in 2021. Yeah, 2021. And, you know, I used to get very abrasive reactions depending on who I would speak to and how I would introduce myself. Like if I just actually just said hello and just say, you know, hey, I'm doing some YouTube content and I'm just filming, you know, can I ask you a few questions? People are absolutely happy to sit down and engage and chat with me. And if I was to say, oh, I'm Johnny from XYZ party, then straight away it's like, oh no, I don't believe in this, I don't believe in that. Yeah. And you get a very different reaction, right? And so that was one of the, it was a great learning for me in terms of like how to approach conversations with people. I feel like, you know, you really need to have this curiosity, you know, and that for me as an individual, like that's how I am anyway. I'm very curious about people's upbringings. I'm very curious about their life. I'm curious about their achievements, because if there's anything that I've learned over doing, you know, 100 or so of these episodes, is that there are so many things that actually resonate on different wavelengths. Like, you know, there's a similarity between one person's life and another person's life. Like, yes, the experience might have been a little bit different, but that experience might be similar, but then their outlooks in terms of how they reflect on that are two totally different experiences, right? And I find that very interesting. It's like that old parable about, you know, the alcoholic father with two sons. And you ask one son, you know, why do you drink? And he says, I learnt from my father. And then you ask the other son, why don't you drink? And he said, I learnt it from my father. Yeah. You know? So can we go back to the Addison's disease thing? Because, excuse me, I'm a little bit curious about, was that something that developed, like you've always had, or did that only develop later in life?
I think it developed later in life. Just had an autoimmune condition. Yeah. Generally, I suppose it really manifested in 2006.
So that was the start of it, when you had the gallstones?
That's when I was diagnosed, about 6 months after that.
Okay, 6 months after.
So I must have had it in, I suppose, a few years leading up to it.
And did you ever notice that there was something wrong? Like, did you feel off before you got the diagnosis, or you felt sick?
There were certain things. I would often stand up and I'd get very dizzy. I had darker skin because of the pigmentation, which is a symptom of Addison's disease. So there's certain things you look back and go, oh, I can realise that now. Luckily, because I was in and out of hospital, I was getting regular fluids. So with Addison's disease, your sodium is low, your potassium is high, and when your electrolyte balance is out of whack, it can be very dangerous. So it was actually an astute doctor. The fourth time after having surgery, I was admitted to hospital because I just wasn't recovering, and I would be in hospital for like 3 or 4 days and then discharged. Yeah. But the fourth time, a doctor looked at me and said, "You've got this very autoimmune condition."
Wow. And do you know what the stats are? Like, how rare is this? It's like one in what?
I've read 1 in 100,000. I don't think it's that rare. I think it's probably like 1 in every 20 or 30,000 people.
Wow. Okay. And then when it comes to treating Addison's disease, so that means, so you mentioned you have to have cortisol shots or something like that?
So basically there are two types of steroids. There's hydrocortisone, and there's another one, fludrocortisone, which replaces what my body doesn't produce. And I have to take those for life. Yeah,
wow. And so is that like a daily thing, or?
So I take hydrocortisone twice a day and fludrocortisone once a day.
Yeah. And then once you sort of got diagnosed, like the sort of recovery process, like what was that like? Did you notice an impact straight away, or was it something that still took a lot of time?
I think it took a lot of time because I was still actually recovering from surgery. So I had an open wound for about 4 months.
Wow, it just stayed open.
So, and my wound site was infected after my surgery. Oh. So that we had to reopen that to clean, and basically I was having a nurse come around every single day and pack the wound. And what the learning from that was, because Addison's disease and then being diagnosed, that it was taking longer to heal.
Yeah, wow.
So you can imagine having an open, like you'd look down at your upper abdomen and you could see like your skin opening up.
Yeah, and it just won't, like the
Would
blood
move.
doesn't scab over or whatever.
Wait, yeah, but it was like the skin was having to close.
Yeah.
It took 4 months for it to do that.
Wow. That'd be scary, really.
Let's get on with it. You know, sometimes it's, if you accept something, it's much easier to control what happens next. If you're kind of a bit of a victim to it, and I know there's the trauma and everything going through that, but if you don't accept, it is harder to recover. If you accept, you do have a better say in how you choose and what you do next.
Yeah, you can choose how you respond rather than reacting to it. Okay, so how did the whole idea about the gay boxing championships
So I
come
wanted
about?
to go to the gay games in Hong Kong and compete in boxing. I wanted to win gold for Australia to call myself the future world gay boxing champion. And then I found out boxing wasn't offered at that game. So had a crazy idea. Why don't I create the world's first LGBTQ+ boxing competition and created the not-for-profit and organised it from there. So it's one of those, I'll just do this and I'll do it.
And so then, like, when you start to go on a journey like that, like, obviously that's a pretty big task to pull that all together. Did you have any advisors, or like how did you?
I had lots of advisors. So LGBTQ+ sporting events have been going for over 40+ years. So I was able to connect with people overseas who'd organised events, getting advice. We've got some great LGBTQ+ sporting charities in Australia, got advice from them. Then I reached out to the WBC, the WBO, IBO, WBA, and they gave me letters of support. The WBC published a statement last year saying they're proud to be an LGBTQ+ ally. That's the first time ever been done. That was the world first. So interviewed by SBS. So literally just constantly communicating. But basically, I was the advocate for LGBTQ+ inclusion in sport. You know, just using my mobile phone and computer.
Wow, it's amazing the things that you can do with just a mobile phone and a computer nowadays, isn't it?
Yeah.
So then, can you speak a little bit in terms of the journey of bringing that to life? And I think you guys had an event in February this year, right?
I had the world's first LGBTQ+ boxing competition during Sydney World Pride. So literally it was trying to get people to come along. I had 35 boxers from Africa who wanted to compete. Not a single one got a visa.
Oh no! So what? Oh, they couldn't come.
They couldn't come. So it was trying to get people. There were some people from America wanted to come, but it was just the cost of it was almost like $4,000 or $5,000 to fly from America. So I had some awesome participants. Had a trans man beat a cisgender man. So it was about advocacy. Had some excellent support from Boxing Australia and Boxing New South Wales. They provided the technical advice, the institutional advice, provided all the referees and judges. Had to do a lot of lobbying, meetings with politicians to get
it over the line.
Get it over the line.
And I guess, can we just touch on the trans? So you mentioned a trans male competed against a cis male and won, which is great. I guess, in terms of that, is there, how do you sort of arrange that? Like in terms of do you think that trans people should be able to compete against, so as an example, a trans female should compete against a cis female? Is that acceptable, or is it only trans males versus cis males? And the reason why I ask that is because, for me in combat sports, like at the end of the day, if people are fully aware of, who they're competing against and they know the background and the history or whatever, and they agree to it and they're getting paid for it, go, by all means go for it. But like where I guess I have an issue with it is that if people don't disclose that, they're a trans female and they want to fight against females, to me that's like a bit of a conflict in my eyes. But I guess, what's your sort of perspective on it?
So the first thing is start from a place of safety. This is combat sports. Right? Start from a place of respect and inclusion. This comes back to what I was saying earlier about the boxing gyms, this gym being welcoming. Not many people will compete at the elite level. Yet all the news is about these few athletes who are. Right. So the first thing is we need to stop the nonsense, and the benefits of health and exercise should be open to everybody. So let's find ways to allow everybody to access the gym, train, compete, so they can get the beautiful benefits of exercise. Going to share some stats. WGBC conducted an anonymous snapshot survey of LGBTQ+ people and allies in boxing. 90% consider homophobia, transphobia a major problem in the sport. 3/4 have witnessed and observed bullying where people train, compete. 40% have experienced bullying where they train or compete. So can you imagine just being who you are? You're observing bullying, you're observing the jokes, the innuendos, the negative commentary, and then you're experiencing bullying. Are you going to then go and compete to know what happens next? There was a fight earlier this year, Chris Eubank Jr., Liam Smith, in a pre-press conference. Liam Smith, homophobic comments or insinuations to Chris Eubank Jr. Chris Eubank Jr. wore a rainbow armband at the weigh-in. He wore a Man United shirt, proud to be an ally. At the end of his fight, a spectator was able to evade security, get ringside, and call him a puff, a faggot, and the C word. Can you imagine what it must be like for somebody who's in the closet to think, are you going to go through that experience? Are you going to go into an arena where you have to put up with all of this hate and bullying? Because that's the why.
Yep.
Right? Other stats, 2/3 from the survey feel that there's visible sports of allyship where they train or compete. So imagine going to your club, hey, we support you, we want to be part of your journey, when you're with us, you can be who you are. And just over half feel comfortable coming out. So what that tells me is that there are endemic problems in the sport, but people are finding where they're accepted and supported, or if not, they're finding places.
Well, I think, that applies to almost any gym facility, right? Like every gym has a different culture. As you said when you came in, you see the energy in this place. Different gyms approach combat differently, and I can give you personal examples of that. So shout out to my guys at JNS Muay Thai. Like that's where I train my kickboxing. But that is a very, very different gym to a lot of other gyms. And when I say that, it's because if you're training in that gym and you're training for competition, the training is really, really difficult. Like when I say difficult, like most people would go to that gym and say, that's a bully gym. You go there, you're going to get bullied. Right? My first experience at that place, the first time I went there, I got dropped twice by a liver shot. And what I realized was like, okay, you can turn around and then go, oh, this place is a bully gym. But then I actually realized that, hey, no, because I had experience going into that gym, the guys knew I had experience, that's actually their way of showing respect. Right? Their way of showing respect is to go, okay, I'm going to come at you with everything that I've got to show that I'm respectful of you rather than just playing around with you. And, you should show me the same respect by going as hard as you can with me. Right? And that's the mindset of that particular place. Now, for some people, and I would say probably the majority of people that have come and gone from that gym, they'd probably look at that and go, oh, they're bullies, right? Because, I trained somewhere else before, I went there, I had a bad experience, and that gym isn't for everyone, right? And they also don't advertise that they're for everyone. They're for very specific types of people, people that like punishment, so to speak. And, gluttons for punishment like myself, we go back there and we get the crap beaten out of us every single time. But, like another example, one of the places that I used to train in Wollongong, the coach there would have this mentality of, you got to break people down before you can build them back up. And some people broke and never recovered from that, right? And so when you look at that from the outside perspective, you go, oh, this place isn't very welcoming or inclusive, but that was his approach to competition. So it's a challenging one, when it comes to bullying.
I guess this comes down to bullying about who you are. Right. So at the end of the 20 to 21 English Premier League season, there was a study of online abuse, and 2 out of 5 players, I think of the top 3 or 4 soccer divisions in England, had formed some kind of online abuse.
For what?
This is just the trolls on social media, right? And 2/5. And the top abuse, or the highest level of abuse, was homophobia, then racism.
Okay, so people just using names, right? Calling names, right?
Whatever the abuse was. So you can imagine you're a straight player. And you're getting the homophobic abuse. And then people are getting racist abuse. And straight male getting the abuse already. And you think that takes just courage and tenacity just to work through. So then can you imagine an LGBTQ plus player then getting all of this abuse just for who he, she or they are? Imagine the difference if you just were accepted for who you are, celebrated without getting the abuse. And I've never experienced racism. I've seen people who have, and I've spoken up. I mean, last year on the bus, there was a woman making sarcastic comments towards a young family, and I said, hey, stop it. You know, just imagine just somebody going through somebody and somebody speaks up. The difference, you know, when you walk into that gym, you know what, you can just be who you are. And that's the why. We can remove that prejudice, we can remove the bullying for just somebody's who they are. If we can stop that, that's a major outcome.
Yeah, look, I think that's an ideal outcome, irrespective of whether people are competing or not.
Yeah.
I guess, you know, for me, it's just when it comes to the physical competition, I know it's only 1% of the population that may actually step in the cage or step in the ring and do that. You know, I have this thing where I feel like I wouldn't like it, you know?
So what the approach we took is sought advice from specialists. Did a consultation survey, which was done by an independent organisation. Sought that advice, and the IOC published their guidelines at the end, I think it was 2019. And it talks about starting from a place of inclusion. In each sporting organisation, they must do its own research. And what's been happening is there's very little research done.
Okay.
So the approach we took is we adopted a policy similar to what Boxing Canada has.
Okay.
And it was around for trans men. Is you must have been on hormone therapy like testosterone. Okay. For a minimum of 12 months prior.
Okay.
And on the day, you know, still be on testosterone. We didn't have any trans women. Okay. The approach we took with trans women as well is that you must have been on hormone therapy for a minimum of 12 months, and your testosterone level must have been at a certain position. From speaking with people who are trans, this is their stories is just like their strength levels are lower, all of those things. So it was, if you're a non-binary person, you were assigned male at birth, you would have been in the men's and non-binary category. You would not for a cisgender woman or, you know, a non-binary person who was assigned female at birth. No way we were going to do that.
Okay.
So a lot
that's
of
where the rubber meets the road. Like that's
look,
reality. As you said, it's safety first and inclusion, right? So
imagine you are non-binary, you're assigned male at birth, and you're in a boxing competition. You know what? We're just going to respect who you are, they, them pronouns. But you're competing against other cisgender men. Same with cisgender women. I believe at the World Amateur Boxing Competition Championships a few years ago, you know, like there were 40% of participants were non-binary, but they were competing against other cisgender women. There's much more work to be done. There's much more research that needs to be done, but it needs to start from a position of safety. From respect and inclusion. If we look at other sports, I think rugby union, they actually then go even one step further and they do an assessment on the skills and capabilities, and then we'll match you in another division just to make sure it's safe. And the policy form that we had is then that individual's doctor then needs to sign off, and the doctor is then has to take into consideration the safety of both participants. That it is a combat sport and everything else. And then with boxing, obviously 3 by 2 minute rounds is very, very different than 12 by 3 minute rounds in men boxing, 8 by 2 minute rounds in female boxing. So just for enable one trans man who'd be able to become a world champion, his testosterone levels are probably very similar to what we have. And like a trans woman, imagine if you've been on estrogen for 20 years. And the difference in strength levels. So at the moment, this conversation is quite nonsensical because people are just saying this happened here, and it's major headline news.
Well, that's the Fallon Fox example, right? Like, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but
she has lost a fight to another woman.
She has lost a fight, but she also, you know, did win convincingly against a few others as well. But I think, you know, the issue there was the disclosure element. Like, you know, it wasn't openly discussed. And it was just so that aspect of it, I feel like, if that's why I said, for me, if people are open about it and there's two consenting adults and a sanctioning body is happy to say, yeah, go for it, and they're getting paid. Look, reality is, if you're an athlete who fights for money, a prize fighter, so to speak, well, you need to get paid, right? You need to make a living.
You need to make a living, but for me, it needs to be incredible levels of safety. The lobbying I've had to, the conversations that I've had, the questions, and there was extensive consultation with trans people, because that's why actually, I'm an ally. Yeah. I'm not an expert.
Yeah.
But as an organisation, we sought guidance from a specialist organisation and who did that consultation and be able to compare against other policies that were in place. And this was a LGBTQ plus sporting event. So I think we just need to work. I think there needs to be more funding. The ISC framework talks about each individual sporting organisation should be doing their own research.
Yeah. And if they're not doing the research, like how do you come up with
and I just don't think a blanket ban is the right way. I think each sport should look at its. I can imagine a question. I don't know much about a question, but we've seen 3-day eventing. We're both female.
Yeah, I think there's different sports have different requirements, right? Like it's very different when you talk about things that are more athletic and dependent on the individual's athletic ability. Like I think, I don't know if this is a similar example, but I was reading this article just in relation to the Women's World Cup, and how there's a comment being made that the majority of people that are sitting out of competition is due to ACL injuries, and I can't remember, it was 36 or 26% of the injuries, or 26% of the people are sitting out at the present moment are all with ACL injuries, and that's due to the hip structure and the alignment of the body is a little bit different for females, and adjusting to training full time and going from basically playing peewees to playing professionally is a massive adjustment, right? And compared to I guess the funding and the eyeballs that men's soccer gets is very different. So that people are sort of like going through this system where they're getting this massive development as they go all the way through. So it's a very interesting one. I don't profess to have any of the answers, but it's
we're having a very respectful conversation.
Yeah.
I'm not a physician. Yeah. I'm knowledgeable through my own education that I've sought and guidance and advice from experts. And there was also a consultation with members of the community and getting to a space where we're able to land on something which was workable and comparable to other boxing organisations, that their own policy. But imagine if none of this was taking place. There's got to be more research. There
wouldn't be the conversation, right? Like nobody would be having the conversation.
There needs to be more funding. And I keep coming back to this point, is that LGBTQ plus people participate in sport at half the rate of the wider population, but the benefits of sport, right? You might not like something about a person, but imagine I had depression last year, very bad depression. A boxing class did so much good for me. Imagine somebody be able to go for a run in the park, to be able to hit the pads. Yeah. And just that difference it makes, but they were denied the opportunity because of the feelings of another person. And if we can start prioritising this, inclusion and enabling people to enjoy the benefits of exercise.
Well, I think, that's the pillars of health, right? It's nutrition, it's exercise, it's sleep, and so many of the things that we... the way that we live our lives nowadays sort of takes us away from those things, because there's all these distractions to get us, thinking about, what do we want to buy next? What are we working for? All of these sorts of things where, we spend our life chasing money, and then as we get older and we start to develop these health concerns, we spend all our money trying to fix our health, rather than, if we just paid attention to it. It's like that old adage between preventative maintenance versus the repair work when you've broken something, right? Like if you spend your days eating healthily, having a good diet, exercising well, taking your vitamins and doing all that, the idea is that you're meant to be preventing these issues down the line. So can we talk a little bit about keynote speaking?
Yeah, please.
And so I guess, what was your first speaking engagement? And I guess for me, I'm sort of curious about, what were some of your emotions going into it, and how did you structure what you want to talk about?
In 2019, I started out on LinkedIn, and within 4 minutes of posting content, I was being interviewed for a podcast. And then I started my own live stream event on LinkedIn. I was one of the first people in Australia to get LinkedIn Live. So I was doing my own speaking on my iPad at home once a week.
Yeah.
And then obviously we were in lockdown, so I was speaking a lot of virtual conferences. I was on panels event. There was a UK, the CIO Summit.
Yep.
So I was on a panel for inclusion and diversity. I was a speaker at LGBTQ Unleashed in 2021, which is the big LGBTQ plus speaking festival and events festival. I've just been able to speak naturally and talk about courage and inclusion. And the last few weeks I've spoken at NRMA and TikTok. Speaking at an event a few weeks ago, and there were people who were there recording a documentary and they were asking me to speak.
Wow.
A documentary. I spoke at Transport for New South Wales last year, their Women in IT conference about courage and equity in IT. So it's just been able to share a voice and get on the mic and just speak. It's such an honour and a privilege, because you see people, the audience, they're nodding, and I usually get people standing up in boxing stance to be able to do so and then we will rock you at the end. So it's just an ability to inspire through words.
And what was the was there any particular reason why you wanted to get into speaking?
People for years said, Martin, you should speak.
Yeah.
And then I didn't listen, and then really just, I think it's in my journey on LinkedIn and sharing my voice and seeing this, and I just really enjoy doing it. If you can just share your story, get on stage, could be on a podcast like this, and share and inspire. I think that's the driver.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I've done quite a bit of public speaking myself, and you always try and think about, okay, what is the message that you're trying to convey, and how do you connect with people? Especially when it's not like, here it's very easy for us to connect. We're looking eye to eye. We can talk and we can really find the middle ground in terms of what we're trying to discuss and really challenge ourselves in terms of the different ideas. But when you're the speaker and you're out in front of however big the audience is, and you've got these points that you want to try and convey, and you want to do that in the best way, the most respectful way possible. Whilst really trying to challenge people's thinking as well. It's not easy, right? It's not for everyone.
It's not for everybody. I mean, I love watching things on YouTube. It's a podcast, and I really enjoyed what that person had to say. Mentioning about the YouTube video of the bridges, and I'd love to have a conversation with the engineers who just like the architects who design them, but also I can just imagine the conversations and the construction. I'm like, how many learnings did they have? And and for me, it's about learning from another person and sharing learnings. Storytelling, for me, is the most impactful form of communication. And my keynotes, I talk about courage, I talk about inclusion, your purpose, and sharing stories of, boxing championships and being in comas.
Yeah.
Just being able to get the word out there, with a call to action. Just keep it very simple, and it's got to have a really good beginning, and it's got to have a very good end, and it's really the nuggets of information which are stacked in the middle. And if you can share that in a way, I think at university or at school, there would have been one school teacher who you loved learning from. What was it about that teacher you were inspired by? The way they talked about things, or they shared something, or the way they explained something.
They built a connection, right? I always talk about this teacher. His name was David O'Brien, and he was our engineering teacher. He used to run the metalwork and the woodwork classes, but I think it was in year 12, so we were doing engineering studies with him, and he said to us, the one thing he said to us is like, hey, everyone in this class, just understand, what does a bachelor mean? Like, what does it mean when you get your university degree? And people are like, oh, you can do this, or you're knowledgeable in this area or that area, and he goes, no, what the bachelor actually means is just that you've got the ability to learn for yourself. And if there's one thing that university can teach you, it's how to obtain information for yourself, right? Like it's, and that's probably the key sort of takeaway that you should get out of university. You shouldn't just be going there just thinking that, I'm going to become knowledgeable in this subject. It's like, if I can learn this course material, well, I can apply it to any other aspect of my life. And how do I learn in any of those other aspects of my life? So, did you ever have any coaching for keynote speaking and things like that?
No.
Everything off the cuff?
Off the cuff. I've just done a lot of research and watched other people. I mean, the benefits of the internet and the current technology that we have now, the access to learning is so much easier than it was when I was at school.
Absolutely.
So I've just been able to listen and taking feedback.
Yep.
Because there'll be times you'll give a keynote speech and say, look, how can I improve here? And just being able to open to that feedback. But I also talk about advice and filtering advice. Give an example, I was posting boxing videos on LinkedIn.
Yep.
And this guy just sent me a message saying, I've been watching you and you do this with your head. And you should do this because Mike Tyson does this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I've got no idea who you are.
Yeah.
Likes to be watching my videos, but look, I'm not going to copy Mike Tyson because Mike Tyson is a professional heavyweight boxer, and my coach tells me to do this because as an amateur boxer, it's really getting my head down in this point to make sure I don't get bashed. I'm not going to get my head up and look and jab somebody.
Yeah.
So it's sometimes not all advice
Is good advice.
Is good advice,
Yeah.
but sometimes it's what I call more of like wisdom, just being open. How can I improve this? Or how can
Well, if
I
it's
do
coming
this?
from Mike Tyson or Teddy Atlas, you'd probably go, okay, I'm going to listen. But if it's the, XYZ random Mr. Jones over there or whatever, unless you know his boxing pedigree, it's very difficult. So then, of course, you should be filtering that. I'm a little bit curious about this, just to sort of switch gears a little, because you mentioned that, you had a bit of a religious upbringing. And I guess all I wanted to ask about was, like, in terms of spirituality, like, what do you believe in the universe? Like, what's sort of, your belief nowadays?
So I guess, my parents weren't particularly religious. We were involved in like the Cubs and the Scouts, and we'd go to church if it was to do with the Cubs, some kind of parade. And Mum was used to go, and I went for a couple of years. Yep. And then I'm an atheist. I was an atheist for a long period of time, and I thought, no, I just don't believe in it. I believe there is a God, but I don't believe God is as prescribed in any text or book. Yep. I believe in more of the values and having good ethics. And if what is called heaven is if it's based on what you believe, I'm not sure if that's the God I want. Yep. If it's about being a good human being and a good person and what you do, if that's not enough to get to what's called heaven, I don't think I want to go there. I'd rather go where good people are. Because I think there are many people of faith who are just fantastic human beings, and there are others who aren't.
And I think it's in any group, right? Like,
it's at any group, and for me, I just want to go where people who I know who are happy, and rather than what believing a certain text.
So the reason why I like to ask that is because, and this might trigger something for you in terms of like when you're in the comas and having these near-death experiences, but and apologies, I'm talking about mescaline again for my listeners who obviously have heard me tell this story, but Martin hasn't. So I had an experience on mescaline, which is like a psychedelic distilled from a cactus, and basically, the easiest way for me to describe it was like you imagine a flat lake, but there's no sides to this lake. And so you imagine, if you were to throw a rock or you were to touch the middle of the lake, the ripples would start going. And that was my experience. Like, there was nothingness. Yeah. And then suddenly, boom, the ripples started and I'm alive. Yeah. Right? And I'm living a life and things start to speed up and my heart rate's going boom, 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 and stepping up. And then suddenly I'm dead. Yeah. And then there'll be like a moment of silence and then it'll start again. Yeah. And, after living and dying about 10,000 times, I came out of that experience like there's only two ways you can come out of that experience. You're either going to go, well, life's pretty meaningless because we live, we die, and so what? Like, there's been millions of people that have lived and died before me. There'll be millions of people to live and die after me, right? But on the flip side, it's like, okay, the way that I sort of viewed it was then part of, having this ability to live a life is because, there has to be something that started it all, right? There has to be that finger, whose finger was that touched the lake and started it all, started the Big Bang, so to speak. And so that made me of the belief that there is, a God, if you want to call him the universe, whatever you want to call him, a creator of some sort, the name has not been revealed to me. Yeah. And I feel like that's an interesting point as well because, I find it interesting that, like I didn't get, that was one of my questions, right? If God does exist, well, what's the name? Because if the name is Jesus or the name is Allah or whatever the name is, right, there's certain connotations to that. Like there's certain requirements depending on if you subscribe to those religions. And I didn't get that from that experience, but it did create this overwhelming belief in me that, there is a God and part of the reason, like that we get to live this amazing life that we live and we get to make the choices that we get to make. We've got this whole idea of free will. You know,
Yeah.
we are conscious beings who can make conscious choices and choose to live our lives however we choose to live our lives. And that is the ultimate expression of unconditional love, right? Like, it's like, you know, I'm going to give you life and you can do whatever you want with it. And some people, like my friend, you know, that we were talking about before the podcast, Adrian, who committed suicide, that's what he chose to do with his life. And, you know, people can have their own interpretations of whether that's right or wrong, but he believed in a God and, you know, he still took his life, right? And, you know, people are free to make these choices in terms of how they want to live. And that, to me, was like this ultimate expression of what love is. Like, you know, for my kids, you know, yes, I'm going to do my best to educate you and guide you and show you as much as I can, but one day Daddy's not going to be around anymore, right? I won't be here. You've got to choose how you want to live, right? So that's why I'm always very curious about where people sit with that, and it's interesting to hear, you know, that you do have a belief that there is something. You've changed from being an atheist.
Yeah, I think it was also cool to be an atheist when I was 14.
Okay.
It was compulsory to have to do religious education up until the age of 14, and then you have to have 1 hour a week of RE at school, and we just didn't care, we weren't listening, and it was just, for me, I love learning. Yeah. And I think if we learn about other people's beliefs and the reason why, and then we just find so many things where we have common ground and why we believe something, and find ways of text and beauty and why people do things in a certain way, and well, I do it the same way, and we find that relatability, we find that connection. Yeah. And if you can just find a way of just being respectful to a person, and honouring their faith, in say, it might say Assalamu alaikum during Ramadan or Eid Mubarak at the end of Eid, just to be able to, sorry, the start of Eid, just to be respectful to another person, and just be able to get that deep connection. Well, you believe this, I believe that, and we have a conversation, then that's the beauty of humanity. Yeah. For me, I have an issue with, I think, religion is the cherry picking. We think I had a conversation the other day with somebody, it was about Leviticus, and it says, I can't remember which verse it is, but it talks about gay men shouldn't do this, and the next line says we should be executed. And my point is, if you believe the first line, it's common sense that you believe the second line. If you don't believe the second line, does that mean the first line is probably no longer relevant anymore? But why is there these few texts are the cause of so much hatred and bigotry to the community?
Well, I always find that a very interesting one when it comes to, like, you know, I sort of, and I've talked about this idea with priests before, right? Like, it's like, I feel like there's many cultures around the world have like this belief in a god of some sort. And it's almost like when something is so large, right, you can't quite see the full breadth of it. You know, like here we can look at this cup, and we can go, you and I can both recognize, okay, this is a teacup or a takeaway container, a takeaway cup. But if you suddenly started to expand this cup and make it larger and larger and larger, where perhaps you and I, we're on opposite ends of this cup, and all I can see is the little D for the branding. Yeah. And I go, it's a D. I wonder what it says. Yeah. Right? But it's so big, I can only see the D. I can't see anything else in terms of what the cup says. And then from your perspective, you might be on the opposite end, and all you can see is the edge of the rim. Yeah. And so you see this little white thing, and you just go, that's a light. Yeah. Okay. Right? And so we're both looking at the same thing, but from each other's perspectives, we're seeing it from two totally different perspectives. Right? And so I go, yes, God exists, and his name starts with a D. Right? Or whatever I can see, and you go, oh, God exists because I see the white light. Yeah. It's like, okay, well, are we both right or are we both wrong? Or, you know, but when all it is that we're just seeing it from alternate perspectives. Yes. So I think that's a really interesting thing to sort of think about, because when the concept of God is almost like something that's as big as infinity, right? And when you really think about infinity, my mind starts to spin.
I mean, the beauty of this is when you see the work people of faith do in the community, how helping others. You might walk past the church and you just see people who have a certain faith, that they're going in there and they're happy, they're smiling. You see the great work that some organisations do because that's their faith and the impact they're making. So for me, that's the beauty of religion. And more on that, and more of and less of the hate. and I think we're probably in a good place.
Yeah. Look, I think that's a beautiful spot for us to end this. Unless there's anything else you want to talk about.
No, thanks very much. It's been
If people want to connect with you, what's the best way for them?
best way is on LinkedIn.
Yep. So Martin Stark on LinkedIn.
Martin Stark on LinkedIn.
All right, beautiful. Well, thanks everyone. I hope you enjoyed it.
Cheers. Thank you.